So I want you to picture this scenario. You've just finished that amazing pot roast that you're going to have in just a little bit, and maybe even a few of the desserts. And there's that hum of voices as people are visiting and laughing across the tables in the dining room. And then all of a sudden someone comes in, clears their throat, holds up a clipboard and says loudly, "Excuse me, can I have your attention for a minute? I need 70 volunteers for a service opportunity this week. This is a great chance to go out into strange and dangerous neighborhoods and just invite yourself into people's homes. It will be like you are defenseless lambs sent out alone into the midst of ravenous wolves. And one more thing, you cannot take anything with you that might make it easier or safer or more comfortable for you to do that, okay? So just come on over and get signed up and we'll get you sent out." Now there might be a few of you that actually would say yes to that, but I'm going to guess that most of us would not jump at this offer. Because most of the time, we need some reassurance or some selling points before we go out and offer to do some volunteering. Most of the time, people have to tell us that it won't take a lot of time or effort, or everything will be set up for you, and all you need to do is show up. Most people know that if you're going to set up a volunteer project, you make it easy for people to commit so that the program can be a success. But instead, what we hear in our reading this morning is that this isn't a request for volunteers. It's an appointment. Jesus appoints 70 people and sends them out. And this is clearly dangerous territory. And he's sending them out completely unprepared and unable to fend for themselves. And wolves aside, without money, how can they buy food or get a place to stay? Without a bag, what are they supposed to do about extra clothes if they get cold or wet or just dirty from the road? How does he not know that they're going to need these things? Well, I think one reason this passage can be hard for us to understand or think about in our own lives is that it goes completely against one of the fundamental values of our culture, which is self-sufficiency. Self-sufficiency is so important to our sense of satisfaction that there's a whole industry dedicated to equipping us to go out and test it ourselves. Now, I absolutely love going to REI and seeing all of the things that make spending time in the great outdoors more comfortable. And in fact, I spent days searching for just the right water bottle for trail runs so that I could carry my iPhone with me. There are monthly boxes from Karen that give you the latest and greatest things for all of your outdoor adventures, so you can be fully prepared for anything you might encounter while you're out in the wilderness or even on the trails in Warner Parks. Any situation that might be a minor inconvenience for you. But the whole point of what Jesus is doing is ensuring that he's sending these 70 people out completely unprepared. They are not permitted to have anything that might enable them any level of self-sufficiency. And as a result of all this, they are the complete opposite of self-sufficient. Their well-being is dependent on the people to whom they have been sent. Some who will probably respond with hostility rather than hospitality. And I think for us, one of the main points in this story is that you cannot do this alone. Because there's a part of this that we notice that they are sent out in pairs. Because with at least two, there's always someone to be encouraging if one of the pair is discouraged, to keep faith if one is dispirited, and to carry on when one feels tempted to quit. Learning to live life in recovery can be hard, but it's always easier with a companion or with several. It's always easier being a part of the fellowship. There is no reason to go into this journey alone. Have you ever gone on vacation or maybe a had a long weekend planned and your plans went absolutely wonky? Nothing turned out the way you planned it to be? A few of you? Yeah. Well, a few summers ago, I was on my way to St. Louis for a 4th of July kind of extended weekend. And it was kind of like the weather we're having here, high 90s, lots of humidity. And I hit one of those sections of the interstate that there's probably about 20 miles either direction from any town. And the radiator blew out in my Blazer. And I was also in a dead zone for my phone. So my dog and I sat in the car with the windows down and trying to figure out what we were going to do. We could start walking in some direction and hope that maybe my cell phone would work in a few miles, or we could stay put. But about the time I decided to try and take Marley and walk along the interstate, a semi pulled over. Now, every scenario from every Lifetime movie that I have ever seen ran through my mind in a matter of seconds. But this guy named Robert stepped out and offered to help. He tried to put water in the radiator and it ran straight through. And then he offered to give me a ride to the next town to find a service station that maybe get my car towed. Again, every Lifetime movie I have ever seen ran through my head. But I decided in that moment to just take the chance, and Marley and I jumped up in the cab of his truck. We got a tow truck and arranged to haul my Blazer to St. Louis, and he offered to give us a ride into St. Louis. And on that ride, I got to hear a story about a father who has daughters, and he wanted to be the person who he hoped would have stopped and helped his daughters if they were stranded on the side of the road. He shared parts of his story and what it was like for him to be away from his family in order to earn a living driving a semi. And in the end, he wouldn't take any money as a thank you, even though we kind of managed to stick some in the cab of his truck where he'd be able to eventually find it. So sometimes I think that the biggest problem with our plans is actually when they work. Because that day could not have gone less according to plan, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. If things had gone according to plan, I would never have had that encounter. I would never have intentionally or willingly put myself in that vulnerable of a situation. To have given up a sense of control or that sense of power over to someone I didn't even know, especially in circumstances that, once again, every Lifetime movie has ever told me holds possible danger. And yet the whole point of getting out of our bubble and comfort zones is to experience something of how people live, to gain some insight on the beauty and the difficulty and complexity and grace of those lives, and see how that might help us to live our own lives more faithfully and more fully. If our plans always worked, we might actually fail at what our true purpose really is, to know what God wants us to experience and to understand about life. And sometimes the biggest problem with our plans is that they work and we begin to think that we are the ones in charge and in control. Because almost by definition, a plan is something that we expect will succeed. But in order to ensure it succeeds, sometimes we tailor the goal to meet the plan rather than the other way around. The formula for success, it's been said, is to underpromise and overdeliver as you plan your work. So if you do that, you can ensure that your plans are successful because you never promise more than you can achieve. But in the process, it's very easy to lose sight of the whole reason you're doing this in the first place. Being successful begins to matter more than what you are succeeding at. So think about how this works with addiction and the progression of this disease. What at one time would have been unacceptable starts to become acceptable. We talk about those lines in the sand. And then those lines start to change as the disease continues to progress. And then those lines in the sand change again and again and again. So what's amazing to me about the story this morning is not the miracles that ended up occurring from the 70 that went out, but the willingness to be dependent on others. Think about that. No purse, no bag, no money, and no guarantees of how they will be received. All they have are the promises and their trust that God will be with them. And I wonder sometimes with our comforts in life, if that creates the illusion of independence that insulates us, at least for a time, from the vicissitudes of life. And that spurs us to imagine that we really don't need God and we really don't need each other because we can do it on our own. Well, this program isn't about that same kind of success that maybe we think about in business or even in a cultural sense. Because our culture consistently and compellingly suggests that security is found through our possessions, encouraging us to buy or consume to satisfy any impulse or whim that we may have. And there are false promises that these things will secure us a sense of well-being. But what if these behaviors actually draw us further from God and heighten our sense of insecurity by pushing us to value things rather than people, to place drugs and alcohol as our higher power, rather than turning toward the God of our understanding? This program encourages some faithful dependence and invites people to practice relying on each other for help, relying on each other for encouragement and support, and relying on the God of your understanding through prayer and meditation to fill that God-shaped hole that actually satisfies that deeper need. There are few things more satisfying and life-giving than sharing with others, giving of our abundance, being able to receive in our need, and all the while being knit more closely together in this fellowship of recovery. The result of this work is found on pages 83 and 84 of the Big Book. When we diligently work the steps, things begin to change, but we can't do it on our own. We will find serenity and know peace, gain interest in others. Our outlook upon life changes, and we trust that God is doing for us what we cannot do for ourselves. This way of life may not be what anyone thought they were ever going to sign up for, but it's time for a change in plans. Trust the process and trust God to go with you. You will not leave here unprepared, and you have been given a fellowship of traveling partners to help you along the way. Amen.